Okay, so little audio test. Anybody's on? Anybody want to tell me if I can't be heard or anything like that? Testing the audio. Cool. Awesome. Alright, we'll get started just as soon as, probably like a minute after 11. That way people have time to chime in, and thanks for coming back. Or thanks for showing up. Hopefully we can draw a cool mech tonight. You guys been able to go to the show today? Anything? Didn't they just had an event like an hour ago. What was that? Anybody go to that? It's like a awards ceremony or something. Maybe it's still going on. How's it going, Corey? Got Sebastian and Corey. Anybody else? Say hello. I'm just gonna keep drinking tea. Cool. Yeah, I went and spent a bunch of my money today. And then I had to kind of realize that if I stayed on there any longer, I would probably empty some crucial bank account or something. So I had to turn it off and go for a hike with the family. You guys seen any talks or demos or anything like that you think I should watch tomorrow? Tad, hey, how's it going, man? Yo to you too. And I'm gonna check out John Navarez. His talks are always awesome. Yeah, I am not sure when the last time I went to a convention and didn't leave broke. I feel like that is part of the process. So. Nobody's late to the party. Everyone's invited and everybody's supposed to be here whenever they want to get here. Alright, so let's start to get set up. Hopefully, if you guys wanted to, you can run over to Gumroad, and the setup file that I'm working with here is downloadable for free over there. So, if you want to have that to kind of play around with, definitely go and grab that. Oh, someone wants to start out right with a question. Let's see. Having a very specific looking style like yours makes it finding clients project harder? Do you usually have to adjust your style? That's a choice. If you enjoy being flexible with your style, and that's something that you can still get a lot out of, then you should absolutely do that. And that makes you, it definitely has a lot of desirability to it. And then there's a trade-off to it as well, though. The trade-off is when you practice one particular style and you focus on that, you become much more, you become more in tune with it, but you just by default will become better at it as long as you're focused on that style. So inevitably, it means that the work in the style that you're focused on is probably going to be better. That is, of course, got a huge range of sliders on it that can change that. Some people can ebb and flow through styles very easily. But having a very particular style, it definitely has its hindrances. If a company isn't going to be hiring stylized work, then you could definitely be up for a fight. But if you feel passionate about your style and you want to stick with it, I recommend it. Yeah, there's always going to be some rough days. I don't think that anybody got into art thinking that this was going to be smooth sailing, or hopefully not. And if they did, well, they at least know by now that it's not smooth sailing all the time. So, but I'll see if I can answer some questions, and maybe we can get into a little bit more of that as I'm working. But I want to work at the same time. Fantasy work, but find mechs super cool. Is there any bleed over in design strategies or tips or practice in mechs you would recommend? The biggest thing with mechs, with technology, is you kind of have to just, it's like with fantasy, you got to focus on all the kind of filigree and the armor types and the different regions from the eras that the armor came from. And with mech, you got to just become obsessed with technology and functionality. It really does come down to a lot of just like, what I want to talk about mostly while we're doing this mech is it's about setting up believability. It doesn't necessarily have to work. But it has to be believable. That's what makes a mech plausible. So when you're working on technology, there's a little bit of a different mindset. That said, the bleed over is the fact that you get entrenched in that genre, and you get good at it, and you feel it. Now, obviously, the surfacing, the hard surfacing, the dents, the bang ups, that stuff is all carryover. So you got a huge leg up there. All right, so like I said when we got started, hopefully you guys were all able to go download the PSD file off of Gumroad. If not, the link's in the description. Otherwise, I'm gonna get started on it, and you guys can just go and grab it when I'm doing something that's not interesting, or you don't have to grab it at all. But I'm working on it. I've doubled the res. It's at 5K. The cutoff for the file size made it so that I had to set the downloadable to 2500 pixels by 2500 pixels. Just scale it up. It'll blur the rough drawing a little bit, which is down here in this rough art folder. But this is the guy that we're going to be focusing on. And yeah, it doesn't matter if it's a little bit blurry, because what we're going to do tonight is trued up. So I'm going to put everything up in this inks directory here. I didn't realize that I was so sloppy with my naming convention, so you guys will have to kind of forgive me a little bit. And yes, for anybody who is going to have to peel off early, this last night I recorded it, posted it, and you should be able to watch it anytime you want. I'll keep it up on the YouTube channel. The PSD will be available all cleaned up on Gumroad, whatever the final is. So if you want to download that, I just asked for $5 for that, for the final thing, just to kind of keep me alive, keep my kids. They keep telling me they want to go to college, which is scary for an artist. But yeah, so all this stuff will be recorded, come and go as you want. I don't expect anybody to want to watch me flatting all the time. And yeah, you have to kind of manually post the things to YouTube. You got to say, yeah, I definitely want to do it, but that's pretty much what I did. All right, So, we're in Clip Studio. If anybody starts asking that question while I'm drawing, we're in Clip Studio Paint, and because I'm doing a mech, I am going to be utilizing a few of their tools, their ruler tools. These brushes right here over on the right are also available. Everything that I'm going to be using tonight are all available over on Gumroad for download for free. Some of them I've made, some of them I have no idea where I got them, but I've just kind of had them for years. But you know, use them. You can do everything that I'm doing tonight with these 6 brushes, and this lasso tool at the top is something that's installed default by Clip Studio, so you just have to add that to your palette. And that's a lasso fill tool, and we're probably going to be using that a little bit later. So let's start out by getting some inking going. And as soon as I start drawing, I don't look at the questions quite as often as I should. So if your question gets lost in the heap, try and get back to it. When you see me kind of taking a break, jump in, ask the question again. I apologize. I'm trying to be a good moderator, but I'm also trying to do you guys a solid and ink something that doesn't look garbage. Yeah, Clip Studio is really good. It's I think every program has its benefits. I really like Photoshop for a lot of reasons, and for obvious reasons I think most people know. But Clip, as far as just like generating art and the brushes and some of their little tools that they've come up with, I think it's just brilliant. And it's cheap. It's cheap compared to the Adobe products, and I am cheap, so I love that. Cheap and good. And I was saying last night, I work on my iPad a lot now, so that I can kind of hang out and watch TV with the family. And the version that's on the iPad is virtually identical to, if not identical to, the desktop version, which I think is remarkable. And so you can go back and forth between your desktop, your PC, or whatever you're using, and your iPad very seamlessly. That is black magic as far as I'm concerned. Increasing the mic volume. That is not the mic's fault, that's my fault. I mumble a lot, but I will do my best to speak louder. But let me just take a quick look, make sure I can't do that. No, that's the max. That's the max. All right, I'm going to speak louder. Is that, if I do that, if I'm just like talking like at that volume, do I sound, I just don't want to sound crazy. Thank you for looking out for me. Appreciate that. So I'm probably going to repeat myself on a couple of things tonight. If you guys were hanging out last night, I apologize. I am a dad, so I tend to repeat myself anyway. But I just want to make sure that people who didn't come over last night are able to kind of hear some of these things. While I'm inking, one of the nice things that Clip Studio has that is over here in the palette swap here. You know, just like in Photoshop, you can go between black and white. But then also this little grid down the bottom underneath the palette, that's transparency. So it's basically it's setting it like an eraser. So you can swap between the foreground background color just like you do in almost every other program, or you can swap between the foreground color and transparency. So what that does is it effectively turns your brush into your eraser for you, which I find is a lot more consistent for you know, when I'm inking. And then what I've done is on my actual Cintiq pen, I've mapped that swapping to the button. So while I'm working, I'm dropping down ink, and then I'm cutting back in, and I'm dropping down ink, and I'm cutting back in, and all I'm doing is hitting it with the side of my thumb. And it just kind of keeps my hand on the page just a little bit more frequently. So I really like that setup, and I've been able to convince a few other people to do that, and I think they enjoy it as well. So that's your first tip of the night. If you want to try that out. It's kind of irritating that they don't have that because of the iPad Pencil, which is $100, and it doesn't come with a button. It has that weird tap button, but you gotta like really tap it. and I don't like that. This one has a very physical button. It's very instantaneous. So it's not that is the one drawback of working on an iPad. But I won't complain too much about it because it also has a lot of bonuses. One being that you can sit on the couch. Oh, lots of fox and ducks here. What's going on? Someone's having a hard time. Alright, so I'm going to start with this jaw section because it's kind of big and bold. And then, I already screwed up a little. And then we'll start using some of Clip Studio's tools. And hopefully that is fun for you guys. And we'll start really banging this guy up. We'll add some wires. Alright, so for like this ear section where I have this ellipse, I could definitely freehand that. But I'm going to instead use this special ruler, concentric circle, and I draw that out. And I usually just draw it out arbitrarily. And so it has this main axis and these two rotation points right here that you can turn it, and then these are the ones that sort of skew how the ellipse, how thin the ellipse is, or whatever the angle of the ellipse. So you basically want to generally figure out where your horizon line is. Put your center point about this little X is your center point. Place that, and then aim that towards your general horizon line. We're gonna probably say horizon line's almost centered across his eye, and get a general size here, and then that will kind of like smart lock to the brush as I'm going and working. So you can see as long as that ellipse tool is working, and then so it drags, when you grab this X, it will drag across that axis. So once I drop that first line, then I can just move across that one axis and be able to get some nice concentric rings, but they look like they're kind of falling into perspective. And sometimes it's a little bit of a trial and error thing, sometimes it's a little bit of an eyeball thing. But you guys get the idea here. So I like to play here. Like usually when I do the roughs, I basically just like leave myself like a blank palette of like, I'm gonna add and subtract some technology here when I'm doing this stuff. And then I can use that same ellipse to kind of build the little hole where the jaw is going to feed into. And then to turn it off so that it's no longer holding on to your line, you can either click on it and hit this little diamond, and it will turn kind of like this deep green, and that basically renders it moot. And there is a way of setting that up on hotkey, or this little button up here in the top, this little arc with the pencil, which is representing that it's locking. You can do that as well. It really depends if you like to find things on your menu, you want to set them up on your hotkeys. So I think I saw asked, so Photoshop cannot do that? No, Photoshop cannot do this. There are some second party pieces of software that some friends have used that I know, and that they lay on top of programs like Photoshop, but they do not have native ruler tools like this. And I'm sure if they become popular enough, they will add them, but for the time being, Photoshop does not have them. Alright, so now I got that working. So last night, I was working on something that was like more of an organic monster, and I was talking about kind of having a touchstone, and something I like to do on technology also is have a little bit of a touchstone. What I mean by that is like having some portion of this that's that's kind of a little bit closer to final as far as the line work goes, so that I can kind of remember the level of where I want to bring everything. So I'm just going to work on this little area over here and just kind of start putting little dents and cracks, which I really should be working on the whole thing all at once. But the way I do like to work is that I just give myself like a little, like I said, a little touchstone. Say like, okay, this is what everything's ultimately going to look like. And then I can be a little looser as I work around the form, knowing that I'm going to come back and keep refining it until it all hits that same level. And that doesn't work for everyone, but that is what you're getting out of me. Do some inset screws. And this is one of the, like when we were talking about when we first got started, this is a great type of thing where like, if you're getting into technology and you're trying to learn how things work, find things built the way that you like them built. I'm a big fan of construction tools and, backhoes and Tonka trucks and all that stuff. And so I always end up really looking a lot at that stuff and how that stuff gets constructed. Oh, French curves right on top. Yeah, I saw some people doing that. I think if the tip of the pencil or the pen, whatever you want to call it, stylus, was just a little bit smaller, more like a number 2 pencil, and you could do that stuff, I think I'd be more comfortable with it. But I'm just kind of like a big ape when I draw, so I don't but that is a cool idea. I love the idea of that because I think it has a lot of ties back to that kind of traditional art, which anything you can do. So I could do this curve with an ellipse and that would probably look a lot better, but I do like to challenge myself to do as many things by hand as I can. Yeah, if I had like all the money in the world, I would just waste it all doing like fake mechs made out of like hydraulic pistons and parts from old construction equipment, which is why I'm glad I don't have a lot of money, because I really shouldn't be doing that stuff. So definitely gonna kind of play up the sort of like Cyclops skull vibe with these, which is what I really like doing with mechs, is getting that kind of like real faceted looking skull. And recently I've really started making my mechs wrinkly, which is I think probably against the rules, so don't tell anybody, but I do make wrinkly metal a lot now. Yeah, I don't want to be blowing city budgets on my stupid projects, but it's, you'll know. I'll be like the Elon Musk of dumb stuff. Alright, so we're going to start adding in a couple secondary details here and there as well. I mean, I've already started adding secondary details in, but just with mechs, with the big forms, as soon as you know something's working, I find it's okay to just kind of indulge and go ahead and have some fun. I mean, that's why you're drawing a mech half the time. It's just because you want to draw all those little details. But just trying to make things look like they were constructed, built by someone else. Have that believability. That's the biggest thing with mechs, is, are they believable? Can you have a request? Uh-oh. What is the request? I don't ever just agree to things blindly. That's a terrible idea. What's your request? You said it 3 times now. Oh, just got me bated breath here. What's the request? Nope, no requests, just the idea of having a request, I think. Do you ever go into your brush settings and change the sensitivity of them? Can you draw Goku? No, I will not draw Goku. I change my brushes almost daily, which is why I'm so willing to just kind of give them up. You know, I keep all the settings that I normally change live on all the brushes, and some days I come in, I'm really heavy-handed, and other days I am a little bit more light-handed, so I have to. Sorry, I'm getting thrown by this Goku thing. And other days I'm a little bit more light with my hands, and so in order to get the same line weight, I have to adjust the brush, and so the curves are constantly changing. So yes, I change them all the time, which a lot of people have asked for my brushes in the past, and that's been the main reason why I haven't really wanted to give them up, because it's like I don't know what the actual settings are for the general public, because I'm constantly changing them. And yeah, so just to answer the Goku question, just because I was dwelling on it a little bit, I'm just not as interested in drawing other people's characters anymore. That's not my thing. I'm much more interested in inventing and doing my own thing. So there are a lot of people who can draw Goku perfectly well, so those people can do it for you. Thanks for coming by, everybody. Seems like we're getting a pretty good crowd going. Alright. Probably need to stop on the secondary details for a little bit, because I can already tell that I'm going to be refining things. Alright, so I'm going to use things like eyes on mechs. Just like, you know, like Gunkeen has his thing, like, you know, like if you're gonna get anything right, get the eyes right. If you are gonna use an ellipse tool and you're gonna freehand everything else, and whatever character you're talking about, get the eyes right. You know, get those things chewed up and beautiful. And so I always tend to just make the eye out of a perfect ellipse, and that way I don't have to worry about it being a little bit off. You know, I'm sure I'll screw it up, but the point is you get it as good as you can, and that way everything else that isn't quite as perfect doesn't look wrong, or can look wrong, as long as the eye looks right. What dimension to that eye? Take your time with these ellipses. You know, you gotta get used to the fact that you're gonna put them in the wrong place a lot, and it's okay. It's part of the process. Is just sort of realizing that you're not gonna put them always in the right place first time, and then you're gonna waste some time setting them up. Some people just want a little Goku. That guy wants a lot of Goku. Or that person wants a lot of Goku. Okay. So now we're going to do the other earphone, or ear joint, whatever you call. So we're going to put that back. Probably should have done that first, because I already had it on the right plane. didn't, because I'm like that. So here's an opportunity where I have like in between the teeth here, and I can create, I could put this little headphone thing right where it needs to go, or ear joint. But as long as I am here, I want to make sure I'm utilizing my negative shapes. So I want to make sure the outside of it doesn't break that tooth line. That way I know my silhouette is clear. I think that's going to look a lot better. If that makes any sense. Carry the jaw joint over. Mecha medium recommendations? You mean like movies and stuff? Because I'm going to tell you, the unfortunate truth is that I actually just work on cars and build models all the time. And I'm too old to be doing that. But not the cars thing. I'm too poor to be doing that. But yeah, between being on Pinterest all the time, flagging really cool technology, building model kits, and working on cars, and just being overall fascinated with that stuff. That is those movies and series. Okay. I mean, I love the old Akira stuff, and like that era of sort of like 80s manga. That stuff is really, really nice. They spared no expense on the details. Alita has some amazing technology in there. So I look at a lot of that stuff. They have really great stylization, but also had a really good sense of believability. All the stuff from Ghost in the Shell is amazing. Yeah, if I could swing my camera right now, I got Gundams and all kinds of different robots sitting around all over the place. And yeah, I don't watch Gundam, but I built the kits. I love them. Yeah, so that's the thing, is like all those series that you guys are talking about, like they look awesome, but I just have not had the time. Like I'm not even really watching TV that much anymore. But I need to get back into some of that stuff. The designs are so amazing. I get taken out of the shows. Actually, you know what? We were just watching. We watched through the entire series of Korra, and my daughter and I finished it today, and we were watching the giant battle at the end with the mech. It's awesome. Really, really cool design. Yes, Kim Baymax. He is one of my favorites. Baymax is one of my favorite designs, and now he's calling me out because I've been repainting them. Alright. So I'm going to go back and do a lot of battle damage on this guy when it comes time, but for now I'm just going to kind of get some of the structure in. Alright, so I'm going to show you what I've been doing a lot lately with things like hoses and stuff like that. So what I do is I'll drop a layer underneath my ink layer, and I'll grab like a solid brush like this fill brush, and I just have to use some pretty bright, pretty light color, and you can see this in some of my other videos, and then it's a little bigger than I want there, and then I just draw the wire, just draw it, that way I get both sides, get the parallels. I'm going to put one up here, and then I go back up to my ink layer, back to my ink brush, and I just sort of trace it. That way I don't have to worry about the parallel sides of it, and I can really relax when I do the flow of it. I really like working that way. And then I can just sort of work on the details on the way down. To use textured screen protector on the Cintiq. Not on the Cintiq, but I definitely use it on my iPad. The iPad with the pencil is like, it's like running water over glass. It's super irritating how slick that is. I do use I think it's the stock nib in the pen, and I wear through them pretty quick, and that seems to work okay. And Kate, no, I don't use the vector layers, although that looks really cool. I need to get more into that. I'm not even going to speak to it, but if anybody wants to talk about it, they basically just have this they basically just keep the lines that you're making vector, if I'm saying that right. Well, I just said I wasn't going to get into it. Anyway, yeah, it's a really smart way of working. Alright, so now you can see, like, I didn't stick to them straight away, but I'm going to just keep that layer down there for future hoses, and as I add stuff, I can just use that layer to kind of drop on some details. And I know I scheduled this for an hour, but after last night I realized it takes me longer, so I'm going to run long, inevitably, when I get to the coloring stage. So hopefully you guys can stick around. If not, it is recorded. You guys can check it out and peel off whenever you have to. Apologize, I always think I'm faster than I am. Yeah, Mech bears. That definitely needs to be done. So I do like to sort of mimic somewhat with the hoses on my robots. I do like to mimic like muscle anatomy, which I think is kind of obvious, but so, you know, I'm not doing a strict sternocleidomastoid muscle here, the sternal muscle that comes down, but, you know, like I like to sort of generally indicate where the trachea is and the trapezius, and I think that looks really cool. Alright, so here's one of my labors of love, and I don't know if anybody else likes doing these, but I love doing vacuum hoses. Do these cross contours. If you guys have done cross contours in school, where you have to draw around the form. Vacuum tubes. They're fun. Go back, double each one up. Split them. Just get lost in this stuff. Connect them up. That's just good old fun. We're going to do more of like a machined one up in the front here. Pretend like that's a little bit in perspective. I'm ignoring the chat for a second here because this does require a bit of paying attention. As you can see, my lines are a little sloppy right now. And then go back and tighten them up just a second. Alright, so now, let's see. For the top, we're going to have that meet some sort of tech. Feels like it has a little bit of an insertion point. The nice thing is we can keep a lot of this kind of vague because we can just touch it with the highlights and the shading, and it will reinforce a lot of these forms for us and make them feel really believable. Just have to indicate them now. Alright, so then maybe the form that it's sort of inserting into has a bit of a grate on it. Cool. Yeah, it's pretty legit trachea. You wouldn't want to get hit there. Well, what I mean by I'm not trying to like say like my messy lines are messy. I'm just saying like I don't commit to them fully. I go back, you know, and really make them what I want. So, you know, like what I mean by they're not clean, they're not finished. How's that? Because I'm always trying to hit a final line. The sooner I can hit a final line, the sooner I'm done with that part of the drawing. All right, so here's another. I think Tad already knows what I'm about to do with this line trick here, but so I'm just conveniently ending these wires just for the piece because it doesn't really have an insertion point. But okay, so I'm going to go back to this layer where I put the wires before, and I'm going to draw a smaller wire going over this one and behind this one. And I'm actually going to spend a little time erasing and cleaning this one up a little bit, because what I like to do now is I'll put that above my line work. See that where it's covering it up? And then I'm going to go above that. I'm going to start a new line work piece and I'm going to draw my wire just like this. I always sound like Bob Ross when I do this stuff. So I'm tracing my wire, and I can even add just a little bit of shadowing, just line weight to say that it's going over that one. And now I can hit this layer that I put above my line work. And so if I were to turn that off, you can see the wire that's underneath it. But if I turn it back on, or actually I just loaded it as a selection. Now I go back down to my ink layer and I hit delete, and that part disappears. And then I hit save. Give me a second. Okay. And then I'm going to drag that layer down on top above my ink layer. And then Clip has these merge buttons down here, and this merges the two layers, the top layer to the bottom layer. So now my inks are together, and I have that wire. I'm just going to delete that. But now I did it kind of slow, but that's a quick way to kind of get like overlapping wires. What was the hardest project you've worked on? Oh. Hardest project I've ever worked on was Ratchet and Clank Up Your Arsenal. We worked a lot of really late nights on that. Sometimes 24 hours a day. Had some young children running around my household, and it was a lot. And I have to say that was definitely one of the hardest things I've ever done in my entire life. Yeah, last night someone told me to save, and like after drawing for like 2 hours. I've done that with client work before. It's very nerve-wracking. Hasn't bitten me too hard, but it certainly has the opportunity to. Below it, merge that down, and because I'm just kind of freewheeling here, like I'll do that a little bit more here and there. If I have the thing really well planned out, I might just do that all in one layer. Just realized my wife's on the chats. My wife is under aliafineart.com, or aliafineart.com. She has her own studio and school. She's been teaching. She teaches me all the time. She's awesome. She knows her stuff. Keeps me in line. A couple more wires, and then we'll move up to doing some damage on this guy. Oh, a couple more wires, earpiece, damage, and then we can get into flatting, which sounds boring, but on a Mech is actually pretty cool. Keep some of these wires a little simple in here. I'll just let the rendering take care of them. Goku again. Some poor kid asked me to draw him Mega Man at a convention one time, and I don't think and this is so sad to see. I don't even know what Mega Man looked like at the time. I was just like, sorry kid, I can't draw you Mega Man. Then I looked him up, and I realized I had seen him before, but I had no idea who he was talking about when talking to him, and he just looked at me like I was crazy. Rightly so. What kinds of jobs do you get the most, concept or illustration? I tend to focus on concept. I do a lot of work with studios trying to get projects off the ground. That's kind of my bread and butter. And then when they get greenlit, they can sign me on to kind of keep the ball rolling. But I really like doing pitch bibles and kind of like feeling out new properties. I'll do an illustration from time to time. It's a really nice release. I really like the kind of sense of finality with those things. But if I were going to choose, I would definitely stick with concept. Improvisational skills. Yeah, you gotta play sort of like mental games with yourself to kind of come up with new ideas. And first you gotta ask yourself like what you're trying to get out of it. Do you want it to be serious? Do you want it to be wacky? Do you want it to be weird? So, I think you have to have a criteria, and then once you have your criteria, I like weird usually. Funny is my second go-to thing. And then you start really paying attention to the stuff around you, and like if you're gonna be drawing mechs and things like that, it's a good idea to look at like the people that you're shopping at the supermarket with, the weird little habits that they have, the kinds of people that they are, the people that you see driving in cars cutting you off and stuff like that. They have always these really interesting nuances that you can look at and decide that is going to be sort of the impetus of your next piece. I drew a piece about a year ago maybe of this robot holding up this little monster, and I was coming back from a run or a walk at the time, and this guy stopped me, and he just looked so desperate to talk to me, and I thought something was wrong. And then he went on and on about how they had seen bears at his brother's place, and he just had to stop and tell me about how they had spotted bears, which could not be true because there's no bears around here. But just, the whole experience was so wonderful, and he was so genuine about the whole experience. And I went home and I just came up with this whole robot based on that experience. And it was just sort of a way of sort of interpreting what I thought was just like this really charming, really fun experience. I wasn't making fun of him. He was definitely very, very concerned and wanting to spread the word. But yeah, look for those opportunities. We all have very weird things happen to us on a daily basis. And you start paying attention to them, you're never going to run out of an idea. Okay, where were we? Wow, what are your favorite artists? My top favorite artist is Alphonse Mucha, which he's not really drawing a lot of mechs these days. He was an Art Nouveau artist. His line work is just about the best line work that's on the planet. Claire Wendling is my absolute favorite. My wife went to France while we were going to art school together, and she traveled overseas, and as kind of a gift she brought me back Claire Wendling's comic books and just changed everything about my art world for me. I'm a big fan of Peter Chung, who did Eon Flux. He's amazing. And then people, Dave Girton, obviously huge inspiration. He's awesome. Corey Loftus. I could probably sit here and just name artists all night long. I'm just a huge fan. I love Chuck Jones. There's all kinds of traditional artists and animation artists. I think I like animators more than comic artists these days. I just think that they put a lot of soul into the characters' movement, which I really enjoy. Alright, let's mess this guy up. He's got all his structure down. Gotta put some cracks in him and make him look like he's been beat up. Oh, he needs rivets. He always needs rivets. Okay. So let's put a hole in his head here. First name I said? Alphonse Muka, yeah, thanks. Oh, I love that you guys are taking care of me. That's awesome. You'll know his work when you see it. The popular stuff is his posters and things like that. He did a lot of that stuff during the times of like the turn of the century stuff, but he was an illustrator like all of us, and then later in his life he decided he wanted to just do something for himself, and he just became this amazing painter. And illustrated what was called the Slav epic. I'm not going to get super into art history right now. My wife will laugh at me. But he just he crushed it. He just made the transition. You could tell it was a personal thing, and absolutely the most beautiful work I've ever seen. Can't wait to see it in person. So the nice thing about broken parts is they're supposed to be messed up, so you don't have to worry about them being too perfect. He's sort of the grandfather of Art Nouveau, and the reason I really stick to him as one of my favorites is because of his line work. His line weight is exceptional. It's just exquisite. A lot of people have been able to pull off very similar stuff, but there's something about his work that it just really sticks to. Alright, some cracks off of that. So yeah, at this point where I'm putting all the kind of like scratches in and little nooks and crannies, I just sort of bounce around the piece and just trying to balance it off. Add little scribe lines in. Nothing says tech like scribe lines. Improving your line work. I get that question a lot, and because I'm kind of a nut for it, I really just suggest drawing from life. And the guy who taught us, and I say us, my wife and I, line work in college, his name was Brad Coleman, and he made us draw plants from life and just practice and practice. You know, you see line weight in graffiti, you see line weight in calligraphy, you see it in really beautiful life drawing, and it's to improve, you have to observe. I really believe that. I really don't think that you can just sit and just like do strokes and just, you know, become better at line weight. You have to know like why you're doing them. They have to apply to something. So if you're just drawing a flower or a leaf, or you're drawing your cat, or you're drawing, you know, a carton of milk, whatever, you know, you're practicing like what that looks like and what represents it the best. And then those become sort of like, you know, automatic for you as you start to make up forms. I know people would much prefer to say like, oh, you buy a book and you buy this particular pen and then you're going to be able good line work. But it really is just that repetition and looking at the objects and how to best represent them and how your hand needs to represent them. Okay, let's stop there with the line work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut off my rough, and I've got this line work now just isolated on in this folder. Now we did the same thing last night. This is how I begin my flatting section. So I'm going to open up this folder where I'm going to keep my flats. I'm going to hit the layer where my inks are, and I'm going to use this little lighthouse. And in Clip Studio, when you put this lighthouse on it, that ends up being a reference layer for any flatting or anything you're doing, but particular for the flatting. So whereas in Photoshop, if you were to use the paint bucket, you'd only be able to use it actually on the line work layer itself. In Clip, it will actually let you keep that layer separate and work on a different layer, but still use it to reference in where you want your flats to go. So the way I start is I pick some really bright, garish color, something that's really easy to read, and I fill the outside of the canvas. Obviously this wouldn't work for like an environment or something like that. And it does its very, very best to look at all the lines, and you can see like I have a little opening up here, so I'll have to go back and fix that. But you can do that. And so then I'm not even going to bother fixing it quite yet. I'm going to control click that layer, and that's going to create a selection. And on the folder itself, I'm going to add a mask. And that mask is going to get inverted. And so now everything technically disappeared, and now I'm going to go back to that flats layer, and I'm just going to fill it completely up with paint. And so what happened is, because I inverted the mask, now it's showing everything from the inside of that selection, and anything that I work on inside that folder is going to be masked off by that folder's mask group. So now I can go back up to that mask. I'm going to use a solid brush, and I'm just going to kind of fill in the helmet that it kind of got screwed up. And get the entirety of my selection. I really don't care what color it is right now. I just need to know that the pixels are pixels that I want isolated for the mask. This program is called Clip Studio Paint. Highly, highly recommend it. Really, really good program. Okay, so we got no other negative shapes. I usually forget a negative shape somewhere, something poking through or something like that, but it seems like I got them all. Okay, so now I usually now will desaturate the form, or the color, darken it just a little bit, and that just kind of creates my base. You don't like the new version interface of Clip Studio? Oh, I don't care. I just haven't upgraded. I have no preference whatsoever. I have learned after years and years of working in video games that you have to adapt to whatever new technology is coming out, and their new UIs every 6 months to a year. And so when someone says there's a new UI and I hate it, I don't care. All right, so I'm still using that fill. It's still looking at the line work, but now I'm just going through and I'm going to start flatting in certain areas. And again, these are not final colors. This is just me isolating things out. So I'm going to call this layer lights. And again, as I said last night, make sure you're labeling your layers as often as possible. When I'm doing a mech, the next thing I usually do is after lights is rubber, because I know that that's a dark gray. So I know that like this vacuum tube is going to be dark gray, and just kind of work through. And sometimes it's faster just to grab a flat brush and just start painting your flats. But with mechs, because they have a lot of nooks and crannies, sometimes this helps. It's a complete preference thing. What's the difference between the three brush sets, the three newsprint brushes? Not much. The 6B and the dark are almost identical, but they just get a little bit darker, and you do have to, when you're in Clip, there's a lot of really nice curves that kind of match your pen pressure sensitivity, and you want to map those to be even more sensitive to your, like the more and more, like, so that for me the 6B lays in darker than the 3. And the 2 I keep as kind of like a lighter version of all of those, and I tend to keep it a larger pencil, and I use that a lot for when I rough things out, or if I'm I also use it to make noise areas on pieces, like if I want to do like rust and stuff like that. So I'll paint with it as well, but it's just kind of like a big light brush. Alright, so I'm just gonna lay in areas that I think are rubber. And you can see, like, when I get to these edges, because it's clipped off because of the mask, I can just be messy and just leave that area without worrying about it too much. So I think the part that I'm about to do after I get this flatted is pretty fun to do, so hopefully you guys will get a kick out of it. and it's going to be when I start chipping things up. Alright, so then we've got some rubber down. Is there anything else that would be rubber? Let's make this little ring inside here. Not necessarily rubber, but I like the value of that gray. And it'll be nice to have that as a selection, so I can do that separately. Okay, so next I'm going to do the wires, so let's label that. So I'm going to do these, and again, just going to say it again, these are not final colors, these are just to kind of get my selections. I will go back and make adjustments shortly. And with the wires, because there's going to be a lot of different color wires, I am going to use one selections off of the individual swatches of color, so I'll have to paint them different colors. This will help me with selections when I'm rendering as well. So I'll pick some color that's pretty different. I'm going to kind of blow through this flatting stage so nobody loses their mind on me. It's not a lot of fun watching people flat. I'm going to do a separate wire layer for some of the underlying wires, just starting to get a little bit complex. And the nice thing about doing mechs as well, that you know you're gonna beat up, like you know you're gonna make them look like they've been around a while. These flats don't have to be as perfect because you're really gonna start junking them up anyway. So yeah, they're gonna end up junky, so you don't have to be too concerned with them the way that you would be if something was more pristine. Alright, and then, oh, the wires up here. Let's not forget those. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a layer at the bottom here, which is like the paint layer. So this will be anywhere that there's just like paint, and we're probably going to use that layer quite a bit. And that's just going to be blocked in as well. So there'll be raw metal, and then there'll be painted areas. That's not painted. I'm sorry. Robots definitely take a little bit longer when it comes to kind of setting up the details. But they are robots, and so they are more fun to do in some ways. And again, I'm being a little sloppy, not necessarily because I'm in a rush, but because I know that I am going to go back and I am going to beat the heck out of this thing. So I'm going to be carving back into these areas quite a bit, and I don't have to be super precise. It's doing an autosave, 1 second. And go. Yeah, it does have these backup saves that it does, which have always been nice, but on the bigger files, sometimes they get you right in the middle of your workflow. And I'm going to paint this guy's face white like a skull, so I'm going to do that on a separate layer. And I can just go ahead and, I know it's going to be pretty light. So I'll just block that in. Now I should make around his eye a rubber color. I think that'll look cool. Draw a lot of interest, a nice bit of contrast in there. Alright, so that was the face. That's paint. And the rubber. That's hair. Yeah, that looks way better. Okay, so now we can start adjusting our colors and making this thing actually look like something. Alright, so I'm gonna turn off. Let's start with the paint, figure out what color we want to make him. How am I going to approach the metal texture? Well, that's why everyone's here. I'm going to show you. I'm not going to hide that from you. No, I'm going to, so what I normally do is I start by just kind of getting the quote unquote pristine version of it. Let's do orange. Yeah, and then saturate them a little bit. Orange and that white look pretty good together usually. We got the rubber turned back on. The wires, those are the underlying wires. Desaturate those quite a bit. Those look okay. Those also need to be desaturated some. Darker. Yeah, and then maybe a little bit of shifting. I don't really like this red here. Purple. I always like purple. That one. Purple. Cool. I'll make these copper, so I'm going to go brighter. So now everything's kind of muted. You know, the metals are obviously very muted, but the colors are all muted, and that way when I do the lights for his eyes, I can use my saturation to make them kind of stand out. I'm gonna go with, yeah, that kind of greenish color looks pretty cool. So when I pick the color, I kind of take like a mental note of it, and then I darken it because I know that I'm gonna brighten those things up. Okay. So here's the bizarre thing that I like to do. So I'm gonna turn everything off. Go back. I'll leave the lights on. Doesn't matter. Rubber. That one's not going to be affected. I go into the flats, this dark gray, and I'm just going to start making a hot mess. I'm going to use this blackout tool because I can get some really interesting marks in it. So I'm just going to start really, what I'm ultimately trying to achieve is rusted metal. So it starts off really ugly, and that is okay. Barely any of this is actually going to show, but what you want is texture. You want to have variation. You can grab other colors, you can grab blacks. I'm stippling. And you can always go back and refine this later because it's on a separate layer. So Where we have to pay attention is where the raw metal is, like his jaw. So we'll kind of muck it up, but then we'll just really pay attention to making that look a little bit nicer. But the rest of it just needs to have texture. And you can see, like, as I just kind of like keep swirling my brush around, it sort of starts to build up this nice kind of like modulation. I'll use some richer reds. And by all means, find noise brushes and rock brushes and things like that and just do this in like 4 seconds. But because I'm doing this demo, I'm not going to break out all my rock brushes and things like that because I don't know where they came from. I can't really just offer them up. I've downloaded them from everybody and tried out and picked the ones that work best for me. And I highly recommend you guys doing the same thing. And those just come in handy to kind of speed things up. But you don't have to have them. You can do it with this stuff. Whoa, that's not supposed to happen. Okay, get rid of that. Alright, now got a base. Now I'm going to grab this newsprint 2, one that I usually use for sketching. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to actually hand paint rust sections, especially on this jaw where I know you're going to see the whole thing. And it's just a lot of stippling and mark making. And I think it can be a really fun part of the process. When you think about like the edges and where the water would collect and in these divots and things like that, you know, like where he's been biting into things and so that rust has been sort of like worn away, so you start kind of like removing that stuff. Yeah, I do a lot of texturing in Photoshop. Is it better? No, they're identical. Absolutely the same. You set up a brush in here with texture on it, you'll have just as much of a blast. They have some really powerful tools. You can bring stamps in, you can bring all kinds of things. It's identical. Don't let anybody tell you, if they tell you that it's not the same or that there isn't the same kind of flexibility, they just haven't tried it. You can do anything you want in this program as far as making really custom brushes. Let's see, we're gonna have a little bit darkening. A little sooting around the edges here. And it's okay for things to look like garbage at this state. Really, it's just the beginning. Just kind of trying to get a general vibe. Alright, so we put the face back on, put the paint back on. You can already start to see how that's going to work. But now I can have a little, I'm going to just use the soft airbrush and I'm going to kind of like calm some of this stuff down so it's not all one note. And I'm actually going to make some interesting marks in here. It really always comes down to just like what you find preference. Don't, you know, so a lot of people say things have to be done a certain way. I do not subscribe to that. You do it however you want, whatever gets you to the final piece that you want to make. If you listen to other people telling you you can't do it a certain way, then you're just limiting yourself. Okay, so I'm gonna guess that some of these edges have kind of gotten scratched, so they're gonna pick up some. They're gonna kind of wear the rust away. So all these little high edges, every time he gets upset, scrapes his jaw up against some piece of machinery. You can see how that modulation, all that rust that we did underneath, is just sort of supporting what we're doing now, where we're going to start to kind of cut back in. And then on both the, I've got the layer for the paint up here, and I've got the face. I'm probably going to do less on the face than I am, but I'm going to use a mask. And now I'm going to go in with my newsprint brush on the mask, and I'm just going to start chewing out edges where the paint has gotten chipped away. And this brush is pretty soft, so I start off just kind of getting some marks, and then I can go in with a more solid brush and really get some more specific lines, chips, scratches. You can see just by kind of layering that stuff up, it starts to look pretty cool. I like the way that rust doesn't necessarily just go through metal like 100% all the time. You can even go back and use some of this blocking brush to kind of like soften some of that down. You know, like I know like out here where the metal's been getting really hot from the exhaust on his ears, you know, that's gonna sort of start melting the paint away. That's stuff that you just sort of observe looking at machinery. I'm just switching between the brushes and just trying to balance out some of the soft versus hard chips and things like that. And you can see, like, as I'm cutting through, it's revealing all that little modulation of rust that we did. You know, it's not all the same note, it's not all the same gray underneath, which just that, I think that looks pretty cool when you give yourself a decent base to start with. Do I use reference for this piece? I would. I'm not using reference for this piece. I've done this enough where the stuff that I'm showing in my demos is stuff that I'm comfortable with. But I have nothing but high praise for using reference. So if you don't know how to draw something, the very first thing to do is find reference of it. Learn how to do it and then get that in your arsenal. At this point for me, I look for technology all the time, still to this day, find reference. And what I'm looking for is a form that I haven't drawn before in my pieces. I'm always looking for that thing that I just haven't added. And so yes, I'm constantly using reference, but for these demos, I'm sitting a little bit in my comfort zone a little bit, just because you guys don't want to watch me struggle through trying to figure how something works out. Save that for another time. That's personal time. All right. And the nice thing about it being on a mask is you can add it back in. So it's not destructive. So if I overpaint and I don't like it, I can always put it back in. I always add the paint back in, which looks really cool. So I did this little faded area right here, and now I'm gonna go back in with paint, and I'm just gonna add areas back in to make it look kind of like reverse it back out. And I think that, you know, like when something explodes, sometimes, you know, like that wire might have hit the metal and blocked the sooting and stuff like that. Yeah, add, subtract. And also, I don't know if you guys have kind of like picked up on anything from last night and tonight, but I'm all about breaking everything up into individual steps. I don't ever, like I'm in awe of anybody who can just like paint everything all at once, you know, just go for it. I just flats, then shading, then highlight, you know, like I just go step by step, and that way, like, I'm not trying to solve everything. Okay, so now I have got this painted, and I'm just gonna go back to not the mask anymore, but the actual orange paint. I'm going to lock that transparency, and I'm going to start adding in some subtle graphics and secondary colors with my flat brush here. So I know I want to add probably like a lighter tone here, maybe a bit more yellow. Yeah. And so all the rust stays intact, and I can play with this, with the rust over it. I can always just go back and add more chipping, but just adding a little secondary color, and maybe it gets a cool stripe. This robot's pilots love having stripes on their helmets. They say that all the time. And then even with the okay. So I locked the transparency to the orange. So only the orange. The orange basically, like anything that you paint on the actual orange. When you lock the transparency up here, this little lock with the grid next to it, you can only paint on the pixels. Anything that's transparent, it won't let you paint on. That's called locking transparency. Hopefully that makes sense. So that's a tech. If you make a mistake and you need to sample the orange, and it's not in a place where you can sample it, where you want to sample that yellow again, you can always just turn off your layer mask and it will be 100% pristine again. So I can always just shift click this mask and everything will disappear, and I can work on it in a pristine state. And just kind of take a look at things, and then I could just turn that mask back on and it will just go right back. Make sense? Alright, so that's his helmet. Actually, I do want to fix that stripe a little bit. It doesn't quite follow the form right. Say it's chunked out a little bit. Back on. Alright, so that's that. Turn our wires back on. Double check that color's working. I actually think the purple isn't working as well anymore now that I see the orange is more muted. So I'm gonna shift select those. I actually shift select these purple ones as well. There. It's better. And then one's below it. There we go. That's working better. Normally, I do throw like a gray layer behind this. I just kind of forgot about it tonight. So, and actually I think I'm going to make his trachea the dark rubber gray. That'll be the last thing. And then we're going to do a little bit of just sort of like drips and oil and things like that, and then we'll move on to shading. Actually, I'm going to go even darker, add a new layer. And actually, it's always nice when you guys if you were to see my actual PSDs of my my own work, I usually actually have a gazillion different flattening layers. Like every little thing will be on its own layer, and the reason is because then I can get selections off of each piece, and it can be kind of like file management nightmare, but really am willing to sacrifice that sanity for being able to get to individual selections really easily when I'm starting to render. Alright, so now let's get a little bit of grime on this thing. So we want to stay below the lights because the lights don't have grime on them, but we want to be above the wires. So I'm going to name that grime. I am going to make sure that that overall layer group is set to pass through, and then on the grime I'm going to set that to multiply. And I'm just going to start using some sort of dark grays and browns to create some drips and soot and things like that. So kind of adds a little bit of life to them. So we'll look for areas where we can imagine that oil has built up, and just kind of darken those in here where like a drip has left. And it takes a second, but as soon as you start kind of getting this going, all of a sudden it starts to really read like this guy's been around a while. See, like on his face, sort of towards the edges. And I'll be a little sloppy at first. Do you color code or name your layers? Oh, I name the heck out of my layers. And I can get lazy with it. I definitely, if the thumbnail is good, like you can really clearly see the thumbnail, I can get lazy with it. But name your layers as often as possible. Name them. It will save you every single time. I always like to, on the base here, I just ground it by adding a little bit of sooting around the smokestack. Kind of start to see how some of that modulation kind of starts to ground things a little bit. And then what's nice is then you can kind of go back and reverse out and get some interesting marks. So it doesn't all have to be airbrushy looking, and you can use your rock brushes or whatever texture brushes you have and get some interesting looks, but it doesn't always have to be soft. And then go through and just kind of add a little bit of grime at the joints. The crevices. And this is really fun because you actually, like, the messier you are, the more natural it looks in the long run, especially after you've rendered it. It's easy to kind of get caught up thinking that the grime is some sort of shading, but it's not. It is just the stuff that's like dripping out of the rivets where he's leaking. These wires definitely got singed, so we definitely want to make sure that they're messed up. Yeah, a lot of I just saw what Sebastian wrote. Yeah, a lot of this technique about naming the different layers did come out of, art directors coming and be like, oh, we love it, but we wish the helmet was blue. And you say, oh, yeah. And you just go to that layer and switch it to blue. And there's a few tricks that you still have to do in order to kind of get it to work, but it's much, much simpler. Okay, I think that is going to work for our flats. Now we're going to move on to rendering this thing out. So I'm going to keep my flats layer open. I accidentally put the shading layer below it. I'm going to move the shading layer up above it. I'm going to use the same exact mask, so I can just drag that mask onto it and it will apply itself. And then double check that, again, Clip has a way of setting the folder group to normal by default. You want to make sure it's set to through, so that way any layer sitting inside that folder, it will respect the layer mode that you're trying to use. And then, okay, so above the flats layer, I'm going to put a layer in between, not in the folders, but just in between the two groups, and I'm going to fill it with white, and I call these my ghost layers. And what that does is I'm just going to just ever so slightly see my flats. I don't want them to be super apparent. The VFX on the cables, we'll get to that. Trust me, we're going to do all kinds of glows and sparks and smoke and things like that. So I put this ghost layer. I do want to see my flat colors, but I don't want to see them at the same intensity that they're going to be for the final while I'm doing my shading, because I want to just sort of isolate the shading layer. So I like to keep it about 50-60%. Sometimes I'll go more or less depending upon it. And then I'm going to fill this with just a deep gray. I'm going to set that to multiply, as you do. And I'm going to put a mask on that. And I'm going to invert it. So now the mask is black. I've got this deep gray, and now I can start shading. And I'm going to shade him as if the light is from the sort of top right. So we'll start with some larger shapes to kind of set the tone. So I use selections to start this process, and it's a little laborious. I really like it. Hopefully you guys like it too. Starts off looking a little bit soft. So I'm gonna start. So we know that because of the curvature of the jaw, the shading is going to be a little bit darker towards the top, and then as it kind of curves down, it's going to lighten up. And then get a little cast shadow, just a little ambient out the side of that, bottom of those panels. and I can come back and refine these things soon, but for now I want to get the eye going. You can see I already messed up one of my selections, so right here where I didn't quite hit the line work, you just grab the smudge tool, just kind of scoot it over, because really you're just looking on the mask and just kind of fix that. So don't be afraid to screw up, it's no big deal. Alright, and then do the side of the jaw here. So the side of the jaw is mostly in light. The selection process is not easy on any any device. Intuos, whatever you're talking about. Oh, we're in an autosave here. Alright, how I started in the industry? Well, it's not, I'll tell you. Do you guys really want to know? I'll tell you, but it's not how things are done now by any stretch. I need at least a few people asking me to tell that story, because that's completely off topic. Otherwise I could talk about it in another thing. Alright, so I just cast a shadow off the ear thing. So this is fun, because this is really just a hemisphere, and you can start to get sloppy once you get your shadows, your adjacent shadows done, because then your selection can kind of bleed into them a little bit. But now I have that selection. Okay, I'll tell it. I went to school initially for animation, and then I fell in love with life drawing and with sculpture, and I ended up really wanting to be a traditional sculptor. And then I met a guy named Doug Tenaple, and Doug Tenaple was the guy who created Earthworm Jim, and I basically hounded him for about 3 or 4 years, telling him I wanted to work for him in some capacity, just because I loved everything that he was working on. And he just didn't really want to have much to do with me. But then by my senior year, I was still sticking my portfolio in front of him, and I think it was finally, I think it was Rob Schrad, the guy who did Scud and Monster House, was sitting next to him in San Diego Comic-Con, and Doug didn't even want to look at my portfolio anymore. And then Rob was like, "Oh, this is not bad," and Doug yanked it out of him. And he had just signed a deal with Spielberg at the time for some Flash animation, and he was desperately looking for people who knew how to animate. And I said, he said, "Do you know how to animate?" And I said, "Of course I know how to animate." And he said, "All right, come by my house on Monday. Here's my address." And I hadn't animated before. I never did that. So I drove home, went to Barnes & Noble's, bought a book on animation, tried to figure out how to do animation. Also bought a book on Flash, tried to figure out Flash. And then showed up to his house. We started working on it, and it was going terribly, but thank goodness the project got canceled, because Flash animation wasn't the thing that they all thought it was going to be. So even though I did finish the job and I did do the animation, it wasn't anything to write home about. So, but he did have another project on the line, which was a stop motion project similar to the battle. I can't remember what it was called. It was similar to the Neverhood stuff, and he said, "Do you know how to sculpt?" And I said, "I do know how to sculpt." And so that wasn't as much as of a lie. And so he said, "All right, well, come by, and we've got this stop motion project. You can help me sculpt the characters, and you can build the sets and things like that." So we did a stop motion project, what had happened was they were supposed to outsource it to a company, and they outsourced it to a company in Wisconsin. It was just based on a concept that Doug had done, and they blew the budget. They just like paid themselves gargantuan amounts of money, and he was left having to deliver this thing. And me, a guy named Mike Dietz, who's an amazing animator, Ed Schofield, it was his garage, and Doug just went to town, and we started working on this project, and it was like dreamy. Like I was getting paid like $5 an hour, drinking Pepsi and Coke all day long. Poor Ed's daughter was living with us at the house and had to put up with us just like wrecking her garage and her house and sharing a bathroom with a bunch of idiots. And I just thought I had made it. Like I just thought everything was gonna go great. And at the end of the summer, I said, all right, so what are we working on next? And he goes, what do you mean, what are we working on next? There's nothing else. We got nothing else lined up. And I didn't quite know what to do, because I had basically like taken a job to make no money just because I wanted the experience. And I was screwed. And he said, why don't you just go down the street? There's a video game company right down the street from your house called The Collective, and tell them I sent you and see if you can work there. So I did. I called on a Sunday of all things after, and I said, hey, my name's Rick Baldwin, and I want a job. And he goes, it's Sunday, right? And the guy was so mad at me, and he just thought I was the biggest idiot. And then I said, Doug Tenapel told me to call, and Shiny was right up the street from where this company was, and so he was like, all right, come in, and I'll have the guys take a look at your stuff. And so then I went in, and the guy said, we have a couple of projects that I think you'd be a good fit for, but you got to meet with a team. And I had no business being there, except for the fact that there was this little Russian guy named Alan who looked at my portfolio, and he saw all the traditional sculpture in it, and he said, there's no way. He said, all the software, I can teach you how to use that, but I could never teach you how to sculpt, and you have that. And he was just a very rare breed. He knew what he was looking for. He just wanted people who understood form and shape, and so he hired me. He trained me in Maya, and then I ended up moving into concept on some of the other projects that came up. And then a couple of years after that, applied at Insomniac Games, and I stayed there for 17 years or something like that, working on all the Ratchet and Clank projects. It was awesome. That was really, really funny. But that is not how you normally get a job. So when people say, like, how do I get into the industry? I'm just like, not the way I got in. All right. So I'm just using my selections. Now I'm going onto the wires. So I'm gonna use the wand tool and select just that one blue wire. And I might have to go back and forth a little bit. This is that perfect opportunity for me to be painting on the wrong layer, but let's see if I can get it right. Looked into the clip folder thing. That's my job. My studio, solving software crap. If your preferences, you can set the default behavior to use through blending. Oh, cool. That's awesome. That's really smart. Yeah, I use Maya a lot, and it's one of those programs that you're never going to know everything that the program can do. And I never thought a drawing program would be like that. I know the ins and outs of Photoshop pretty well, just from using it for years and years. Clip Studio is like this endless pit of options, and you can just do so much in it. So, yeah, it's really cool. Thank you for looking that up. That's really cool. Still use Maya? Yeah, I love Maya. And I don't love Maya like I don't want to like piss off Blender people or anything like that. I love Maya just because I've been using it for years and years and years, and ZBrush and whatever else. So I don't fall in love with any program. I think they all have a gargantuan amount of problems, I think they all have their strong suits, and I think people who become like cheerleaders for one program or not are really just selling themselves short. So you'll notice like when I'm doing these shadows on like things like the wires where I'm like casting the jaw shadow over it and then there's the wire, like it's nice to have forms that are going to have like sharp shadows from like something casting over them as well as softer shadows. I think it actually adds a lot to the visuals. Have you ever messed with Procreate on iPad? I have, until Clip released their version, and Clip on, I mean, it's awesome. I think everything about Procreate is great, but because I use Clip for work and because I want to be able to work on the couch and I want to be able to go between the two of them and save my rulers and all that, whatever else I'm working on, I just, I think it's like some nominal amount of money. I was able to buy Clip for my iPad and just work on that on the couch, and my workflow is seamless with it. It's great. I'm trying Blender and I've seen you can export 3D models in Clip Studio. Yeah, you can. You can bring the 3D models in. I messed with it a little bit. It's not like Maya or Blender or ZBrush where you can whip the models around. I think and this would be, I just think they're out of their element a little bit. The navigation to move a 3D model inside of Maya is a little clunky. I'm sorry, not in Maya. In Clip is a little clunky, and that's that's my hang up because I've been using 3D software for so long that I don't really have as much forgiveness for that. I think someone who has never used a 3D program before is probably a little bit more willing to accept the way it works. But just because I'm used to using Maya, I don't have the patience for it. I don't know why I'm making that selection. I have it right here. Here we go. See? Save myself 2 seconds. Adds up. So like this cast shadow from this wire being nice and really, really trued up, and then the rest of these things as they're just a little bit further away, just sort of ghost on. It just has like these nice little rhythms that I get into. Couldn't find joy in Maya and ZBrush. That's fine. It's not for everyone. You don't have to like it. I will say, like I had to do it for work. When you have to do something for work and you have to get good at something, that definitely speeds up your learning curve a lot. But it's the difference between getting paid or not. But once you, it's like anything. Once you get good at something, then you find joy in it. And I wish it wasn't that way. I wish you could find joy in something that you weren't good at. But I think our expectations are a lot higher than it was always realistic. So I think if you can just make a really basic object in one of those programs and then slowly start building your repertoire up and getting used to the hotkeys and setting up your custom workflow, you could actually have some fun. But it's not one and done. They are very, very deep programs, and I don't blame anybody for not having the patience for them. I enjoy building things, and I don't always want to draw. So being able to 3D model is always good. Alright, so like under the neck, where I know it's going to have a lot of cast shadow, I'm not going to waste my time shading each individual thing, I'm going to knock in the big shapes. And then, so we know jaw is casting a shadow down over top of this thing pretty harshly. So then I don't waste my time. I know that this plane right here is facing away from the light. Now I can go back and start kind of refining that stuff. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll use a hard brush. I don't love this process, but I'll use a hard brush and I'll just kind of block in the shadows. And then I'll go back and kind of blur them and kind of soften them up. So look for opportunities to, like I know that this is going to be inset, that's going to be inset, that's going to be inset. But you can see like those lines that I was complaining about earlier, how like I didn't have them super trued up. Well, I'm hitting them with shadow shapes and things like that. So that's kind of like reinforcing them, so they don't necessarily have to be perfect. How many abandoned IPs have you worked for? That's a funny question, actually. I'm going to go back to Toonfist questions in a second, but the abandoned IPs, that's kind of become my breadwinner for for a lot of things, because a lot of companies want to get their IPs off the ground, and they may never ever see the light of day. So you can actually do pretty well for yourself just working on pitches and helping people get their ideas off the ground, getting them in front of executives. Oops. And maybe wrong place, wrong time type of thing, but gives you a lot of practice. There's a lot, they usually have a pretty decent budget, usually really fun. It's for me, it's the best time to work on the projects, because the people are really, really passionate about the projects. They're willing to try a lot of new things to make their projects stand out. It's not until things get greenlit that budget restraints and people with fear in their eyes start getting involved. So I really like working on those projects. So when it comes to abandoned projects, I've worked on probably 50, 60 abandoned IPs. So it's just, I don't know, I enjoy it. Sometimes I get a little fed up that the work that I do will never see the light of day and I can never show it. So I try not to do it too much, because I can get to you. But it is also, like I said, I really enjoy working with teams who are excited about their projects. So that is an opportune time to get involved with groups who, whether it's going to be, whether you can tell from the very beginning that it's going to land or not, it doesn't really matter. You have the opportunity to work with people who are just really impassioned about a project. That's really good for your soul. Okay, so let's see. Toonfist, where'd your question go? Do you have any tricks or rules for combination of your gray shading drop shadow blend with your black ink drop shadow? Well, in a second, I'm gonna adjust my shadow color. That's gonna help a lot. But I usually don't go as dark as my line work too often. I have chosen in I'll call it my style, even though it's kind of like forbidden terminology. I like to leave the line work apparent, and I don't like to completely let it go away. But I do color it, which is going to be part of this process, and you'll see that. But if you want it to go away completely, some of the core shadows that I'm going to do, you're going to see that I will get pretty close to the black. We're just about. Sheet with these. So like I was saying with the this hard brush, so you can go in and drop in some kind of like really nice hard shadows, but a lot of times they're a little too hard. So then you can go into the blur tool here. It's a little fingertip tool, and just kind of give it just a little couple taps, and it kind of softens up that shadow just a little bit. And same thing down here. Like I don't want all these shadows to be so tight, especially the bottom edge where the light is starting to dissipate a little bit. All right, what do we got left? We got to do the vacuum tube in the back, and the hose. Let's do up here. One thing that I don't always follow, but try and work for the forms that are on top first when you're shading. That way you know what they're getting cast down on top of. Once you get a little bit more comfortable with it, you can start moving into just shading whatever you want. But just shading this form in particular, like this tube. You know, I know that the helmet is above it, so I know that it's going to cast a shadow over top of it. And if I didn't pre-indicate that, I might not know that. And then the form that's underneath that is going to receive a shadow from it. So it's just like these little like stepping stones. Sometimes I cheat the light logic a little bit. Don't tell anybody. Because I really like shadows casting, and I think little cheats here and there go a long way. Like, you know, that shadow wouldn't get cast that way, but that's okay. The reality police have my number. If they want to talk about it, we can get on the phone. So like I just like that piece right there. I just kind of like systematically went through and cast the shadows from the forms above it. So you, as a general rule with shading, you just kind of like work broad, real broad, to like what the object looks like without getting any shading on it, and then start adding in. I'm not shading without any other objects obscuring it, and then you slowly start adding in the obscurations of those objects. How do you manage to sit for 2 hours without getting up? I've been working as a concept artist for 17 years. I think my normal is 2 to 4 hours. If you don't like what you're working on, you get up a lot more. You know, like when you're having a really bad project, I drink a lot more coffee, I can tell you that. Oops. Wrong hockey. Ignore with that. Do I usually complete a piece in one session? No, I don't. I like to, you know, like especially for like Instagram places, because I think, you know, like when you're posting a lot, you like to get the feedback going as soon as possible. But if I'm being fair to myself, I like to work on a piece for 2 days, and that way I'm fresh for the 2 different stages. Sorry, I want to make sure I get this right, because I think I just selected a bunch of stuff. Okay. What was I saying? So I tend to do the line work on one day, and or the, whatever. Basically, I have to recognize when I'm starting to get tired. And then if I push through and start doing all the final rendering and things like that, I usually am not taking it to a new level. So if my goal is to challenge myself, is to grow and to do a better piece than I've done before, then I really need to break it up, because I need to be fresh for every new stage. But if I'm under deadline, or if I just want to get a piece out, or if it's not really breaking any new ground for me, yeah, I'll do it in the same session, no problem. I think that can be fine. But a lot of what I'm focused on now is just trying to be getting myself better at things that I'm just uncomfortable with, trying to challenge myself into that stuff. So if I try and challenge myself while I'm tired, it's useless. Do I work morning and night? I am not a morning person. even when I was an insomniac, I would schedule all my meetings for the mornings. I just can't do it. I mean, you have to do it because that's your job. But I like to work. I usually work till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. I prefer that. It feels a lot better to me. It's quiet. I don't feel like I have anything else that I could be doing. One of the things that I always struggled with when I had desk jobs was if they had windows and you could see outside and it was beautiful out. I don't want to be inside. But rainy days or nighttime, I can work solid, no problem. What in the world do you need to work on? Oh, yeah. No, that's I appreciate that. I didn't read that right. No, trust me, it never ends. Never ends. And just as soon as you get good at doing something, you forget how to do it, or you find someone who can do it better than you. Challenge is on. Okay. And just these wires up here. Sebastian, I don't know what his attention lifespan is longer than a usual human being. Oh, what is CHAIT? Is that? Yeah, rainy days are awesome because you don't feel bad. You're not supposed to be doing anything else except for suffering inside, so you might as well draw all day long. Oh, chair. What chair do I have? Oh, I bought an Aeron chair. I have a bad back. I was a lobsterman for 6 years. My back is totally screwed up. So I have to have really, really comfy chairs. And Aeron chairs on Craigslist, they're $500 or $600. And that is more money than I'd ever spent on a chair before in my life, but it is worth every penny. Sorry. I probably could have figured that out if it was like, if I was being smart. Okay. No, that's not a problem. Okay. So we got the shading done. So once we got the shading done, it starts to kind of get kind of fun. So I'm going to turn the ghost layer off. And now you can see what the character looks like with the full intensity of the shading on top of the full chroma spectrum of the paint. And then what I usually do now is I colorize the shadows. So right now it's a gray color. I'm just going to turn it to something really horrible, like a bright red or a bright pink or something like that. Just that way I can see it. Okay, and it doesn't always look bad. It can kind of look interesting. No, I'm not talking about Air and Blaze. I have an Aeron chair. If you look them up, type it in just like basically, and you're gonna find these chairs. They're just really comfortable. Okay, so see how garish that looks. And so now what I do is I leave the color really bright, and I figure out like what color I want my shadows. I tend to lean towards these kind of like purple colors, and then I'm gonna drop the saturation way down so it's not so heavy, and then I'm gonna darken it just ever so slightly, get that mood just where I want it to be, and that's looking pretty good already. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'm gonna start paying attention to my core shadows. So in order to do core shadows, I don't want my core shadows to leave the shadow layer. So I'm going to use this shadow layer, I'm going to put a layer above it, and I'm going to fill it with black. I don't have to fill it with black, you can just airbrush this, but I'm going to fill it with black. I'm going to put a mask on that and hide it, so now it's completely hidden. And then I'm going to take that layer, and in Clip Studio, it's a little different the way that you layer link than you do in Photoshop. In Photoshop, you hold down in between the two layers and you kind of create this little arrow and it links them. Here it's this double ellipse thing and it makes this little pink dash over here and it links them down. So I'm going to go into the mask and use my airbrush, and I'm going to just slowly start bringing in some core shadows. And you just want to be light with your touch on these, but it kind of gives this illusion that there's some reflective light, and then get some of the ambient occlusion stuff going on. And I usually go a little overboard at first and then I start backing it off. But this is what I was talking about, where I kind of get my shadows a little closer, you know, like especially where the forms are really obscuring light. That's where you want to start bringing this up. You know, get that core going. And then Creature Box reunion tour. Creature Box is still going. It's just we have some very different schedules going on right now, so we haven't really been able to do anything. But the time is right. Time is right. So like where these wires are kind of like getting deep inside, they're gonna darken up. All right, I don't go crazy with that stuff. You can spend all night doing it. A true ambient pass is like as laborious as doing a shadow pass. You're going through and you're making masks and doing all that stuff, but we're not gonna mess around with that too much. Okay, and then just like I did last night, we're gonna do the very first highlight pass. I'm gonna show you this quick and dirty technique that I use. It's not in any way something that I'm proud of, but it is quick. So what I usually do is I select all my flats and I duplicate them, and I'm going to merge those into one layer. So now I have all my flats, and I'm going to move those up above my shadow, and I'm going to set those to add. You see they glow. Now I'm going to put that inside of a group, and I have to set that to through until until I set my preferences properly. Okay, so now you can see I have that flats inside that folder, and I'm going to take my shadow mask, this one down here, and I'm going to put it on that folder, and I'm going to invert it by hitting Control I. Now what you saw just now was now everything that's in shadow has been obscured, right? And the highlights are all as bright as crazy. Now when you first do this, you're like, wow, it's done, it's popping, you know, like everything's going really good, but that's not the way to use this layer, which is kind of why I think it's funny to show this. So the next step on this is now I want to mask off the actual paint layer that I created. I'm going to invert that. Okay, so now it's technically gone, but now what I have the option of doing is I'm going to start bringing my highlights in using that layer. I'm going to start revealing some of that. You can see just by very quickly And what it does is it has like a little bit of the color of the underlying form already built into it because you used your flatware. It doesn't always work. Sometimes it totally messes up your piece. It looks really garish. It can make a lot of metals look like anodized aluminum. Doesn't always have the right surface property, so I tend to not go hog wild with it, but you know, because we're moving quick tonight, I like to use it for my quicker pieces. So I'm just slowly bringing up some general highlights. But you can see just how fast things start to kind of come together here. Yeah, I don't really like to go by wisdom. I think it has a lot more to do with like someone gave you some absurd deadline and you have to work smart. So we'll go down now. So I work kind of broad at first to kind of knock these in to figure out where they go, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to work on each one of them a little bit to kind of true them up. And then I'm going to do a second highlight pass after this. That is, you know, for the wets and things like that, to kind of really make things dialed in. Okay, so like you can see, like I just made these like broad highlights on this metal up here, and you know, because it's metal, it always gets like extra. So then I'll go back with like the fill brush or the pencil brush or newsprint brush, and I'll just, that was too big, and I'll start chewing back into it and creating little chips out of it, because the nice thing about highlights, and I said this last night, is that they pick up on the surface a lot more than shadows do. So it's nice to start showing off where some of the chipping is, or if it's skin, where some of the texture of the skin goes. You know, if something has a recess, you know, go ahead and, you know, like let's say that this metal is folding over right here. And you can add in with these fine brushes as well to get some of the tighter highlights. And it won't work in your shadows because the shadow mask that we used is obscuring it. Are you going to sell the Photoshop texture brushes on Gumroad? There are no Photoshop texture brushes. The ones that I have, that I use, I have either bought or commandeered from different people. I have no right to sell those things. So no, I can't do that. Not be able to sleep at night. But they're everywhere, and I highly recommend just looking around and trying different people's texture brushes out. I do like making my own as well, which is really fun, but I just haven't made any in a long time. If I do make a set and they're legitimately mine, I will definitely offer them up. Well, the Photoshop brushes and the clip brushes, just to be clear, because we're not gonna, you can basically make the same brush that you make in Photoshop in clip. So if someone's talking about a Photoshop brush or they're talking about a clip brush, if you spend the time, you can do almost identical brushes in each. It's, you know, it comes down to the stamps and the pressure sensitivities and things like that, and with just a little bit of time, you can get an identical brush. So it's not apples to apples, but it's darn near close, and you can mimic each one pretty close. Which Cintiq? What's the big one? What's their new big one? Is it the 24? I think that's what I'm on. Whatever the one that makes your bank account hurt the most. Their naming convention is always kind of strange to me, so I don't remember which one it is. I think it's the 24 HD. All right, so you can see like down here, I'm giving it my all to kind of like put these highlights in, but the range of the highlight layer only goes so far. So that's why I always have a highlight layer that I'm going to put in above it, so I can push things all the way up. 32. Oh no, it's not the 32. That thing's insane. Oh my gosh. So they came and demoed those for us at work, and that thing, yeah, it was like sitting in front of like a piano organ. No, it's not that one. It's the 24. It's still it just has like 2 kickstands in the back, and they offer a stand. It's that one. It's the newest one, newest big one, not the 32. That thing was so big it just made me uncomfortable. How much does it cost? I don't know, but more than much more. Like, my favorite cars are like, no, I think they're like $2,500. But don't quote me on that. But like, that's more than my favorite cars. So like, it's heartbreaking to spend that kind of money. All right, so we're gonna put a layer above that. I want the freedom to kind of go into the shadows a little bit, and this is just gonna be an add layer as well. And I'm just gonna do straight up sampling and just add some little highlights in. And I'm using my soft brush or my light pencil brush here because it's something I can kind of build up, and that way nothing is all one note. I'm just looking for those high edges. That kind of. And it's okay to go overboard. Sometimes with highlights in particular, like I'll show you, like with highlights, it's fun to just go nuts and go like really heavy like this, even though that's not how you would actually want it. And then you go back and you just knock it back, right? Like you can get so caught up trying to make each mark both the right density, the right intensity, like the right shape. Like, no, just go overboard, go for it, and then just knock it back later. You know, just take your time and do little different steps. 24 so far, around 25. Yeah, that sounds about right. There are certain things that I buy that they're so expensive that like I have this like mechanism in my brain that like immediately forgets how much they cost, so that I don't constantly think about it. But it's a beautiful machine, and I definitely think it's worth having. I just wish that technology wasn't so expensive, but it is gorgeous. It's really nice to draw on. They really fixed like the fans. The fans are quiet. Doesn't get too hot. It's a really, really beautiful machine. Wacom did a good job with it. But it just doesn't matter what it is. It always hurts to buy expensive technology, especially when you'd rather buy some 70s hot rod or something. Alright, so we're getting the basics of the highlights down, and I'm not gonna go super specific with them, but you can this is one of those things where you can get kind of lost in them as well. So now, next step for me is I'm gonna add a kick light. And a kick light is like a rim light, and it's usually like a different color. If it's for work, it doesn't have a price on it. Yeah, it does. Depends on how much money you're gonna make. You want to save most of your money, otherwise you'll be poor your whole career. All right, so I'm just gonna pick this garish blue. I'm gonna set this to add. I don't really care what color it is right this second. I'll mask that off, invert that, and now I'm just gonna look for areas where kind of like a little bit of a kick light is nice to have around the edges. So I'm just gonna, it's one of those times where you go a little bit overboard and then knock it back. You just look for areas in the shadow masses where it could hit a little reflected light, and then you go back and kind of refine it. Right? It just, for me, it just rounds out the forms a little bit. So I'm not going to go crazy, just kind of keep it. And I'm not worried about the color either. Like, it's, the blue doesn't technically not work, but it may not be the final tone or whatever. So I'm just kind of going through and, you know, like on this neck thing here. So then, quite a bit. Maybe catching on the inside of those teeth a little bit. Rim of the helmet, bottom of these wires. Let's see. It's great to study construction mech to make mecha. Is it great to study construction machines? Yes. Yes. Absolutely yes. I take like I go onto construction sites, you know, like they always like leave the tractors like parked and stuff like that, and I quietly sneak on with my phone and just take as many pictures of all the pistons and hydraulic wires, and oh my god, that stuff is so cool. Like I'm too old to be like falling in love with Tonka stuff, but it's just like, oh god, this stuff is so really beautiful stuff. Like I think those engineers enjoy their jobs. They just make really beautiful stuff. Okay, so that is a terrible color. It's really blue, so I'm gonna just get a little hue set and calm it down. So maybe a little bit on the purple side. Is that better? No, that looks bad too. There we go. A little bit of green, just to kind of round out the bottoms of those forms. All right, and now before we get into what are we gonna do next? I'll throw a background behind this thing. That way it has a little bit of something we can ground it on. So I'm just gonna do this kind of stripe. And again, I don't really care what it looks like at first. Go bright with it. And then I'm going to lock the transparency on that and paint into it a little. I'm not going to paint into it completely. Or I'm not going to finish it, but I am going to get this gradient going. Damn straight, Corey. What did Corey say? For the price, the 32-inch should come with a free desk, because you... Yeah, I think that was a funny machine for them to make. It's definitely strange. Okay, so now we're gonna get into the lights. These are kind of fun to do. So I'm gonna load the selection of the lights, and I'm gonna set that to add, and I'm gonna do the reflection, which is basically it reflects the sky. So the top of this concave form is receiving the light from the sky, and then there's always this like landscape at the bottom of the sky. So we're going to chisel that in, some mountains or something like that. This can be ultra specific or it can be kind of obscure. And then as the form kind of gets closer to the edges, I tend to kind of like wipe it out. And then I'll blur it up a little bit so it's not so sharp. And we got our first stage reflection. And then we're going to do a layer above that for the actual highlights. I tend to keep these separate from the highlights on the rest of the thing just because glass is such a different material. Have we ever thought about reprinting some of the previous Creature Box books? Yeah, sometimes. It's a lot of work. You got 5,000 people who are ready to buy a book. You let me know. Okay, so I'll get a little highlight in there. A little reflected light down there. I'm going to blur that as well. And then we'll kind of add the same thing on this eye. Blur that. And then I'm going to erase that out a little. Okay. So you can see it's starting to look kind of roundy. Now we'll do, because this is more of like a post process, we want to go up into the post group, which is above the inks. and I'm going to set that layer to add as well. And I'm going to kind of sample this green color. I'm going to go pretty dark with it. And I'm going to first start by adding sort of like this internal light where it's kind of glowing from. I'm going to use that selection. So this is, his eyes kind of got like a central light. And then I'm going to drop that selection and I'm going to just sort of start adding in some of the glowing bits coming out of. Are you going to see me tomorrow? Yeah, I got one more demo tomorrow. I'm going to do a space alien astronaut kind of looking thing. I'm looking forward to it. It should be fun. The start file for that is up on Gumroad as well. So if you guys want to join in for that, go grab that. All right, so that's those lit up. And then we gotta get some sparks going, so we'll just do another add layer. We'll just keep these all separate, that way if we have to adjust them, they're all in separate layers. So, oh, doing an auto save here for a second. Come on, there we go. I should probably save myself. Just give me a second, it's saving. Okay, so we're actually going to start with a normal layer for sparks. I'm going to do kind of like a nice bright orange. And I'll start knocking these in. And I'm going to keep them a little darker than sparks because we're going to brighten them up. And you know, like we could do like electricity arcing out of them or something like that, but I'm just gonna do sparks for tonight. You can see those look way too dark, not very convincing. But then we go to the layer above it with the same color, but now this layer is set to add. And I'm gonna start. It's supposed to be set to add, but it's not because I'm an idiot. Oh, no, wait. Oh, there it is. Not set to through. There we go. Okay. That's set to add. So now I can start using the add to kind of brighten these up. And you know, the background helps a lot because it's actually showing like the glows and things like that. So I can add like a little electricity in there and sparks. Cool. And then second to last thing we're going to do is we're going to add some smoke. So the smoke is coming out of the stacks. So we'll go with like an airbrush, some dark gray. Start with just kind of like soft brushiness. Gonna get a little bit smaller, refine those forms a little. And then I'm going to lock the transparency on that. And I'm going to go to black, get the base just nice and dark, and then hit it with some of these dark orange spots. Like it's got little cinders coming out of it. And then above that I'll do another add glow layer here. Yeah, excuse me. And just kind of get those things popping. They look like they have a little bit of energy to them. And then the very last thing that we're going to do on this is we're going to color the line work just on some of the highlight areas just to kind of calm it down a little bit. You can see like the line on the top of the helmet is really coming forward. So put a layer above the line work. I'm going to link it down so it's a child now of the line. And I'm going to just sort of sample colors across it. Now, I don't like to obliterate my line completely. And I actually, that's just a conscious choice. But I'm just going to kind of like slowly relieve those a little bit. I don't want to take them out completely. There is no real reason other than just sheer preference on that stuff. I love painterly looking stuff, so when people do obliterated line work and it looks good, I'm all in. I'm just gonna go around and calm down some of the line on the highlight sections. Oh, I want to do a few little glows on the highlights as well. Where are the highlights? There we are. Hey. Yep. So this is like a James Gurney trick where like he picks his highlights, his bright highlights, and he gives them like a little pop of soft, kind of like, I saw him do this in some of his gouache paintings, and it's like, oh, that's so sexy. You don't want to go too far with it. So you can create a new layer above the lines and are just painting over the lines. So it's a new layer, but it's linked over it. So because the lines are transparent everywhere except for the ink, so it only affects the lines that it's painted on. So as long as it's got this little link, which is this little icon here, or in Photoshop you hold down I think Alt and then click between the layers, and it will put an arrow parenting it down. So if I were to disconnect it, you can see the paint is everywhere, right? Paint is just like completely blown out, but if I link it, it's locked to just what pixels are in the layer below it. And now, so then we're gonna do the obligatory kind of like background noise, and I think we're gonna call this guy done. So we'll do a few little dust particles back here, so it doesn't feel so stock. And I think that's going to be it. So there's your robot mech for the evening. I'm going to stick around for a little bit and answer questions if anybody has them for about 10 minutes or so, and then I'll get to work on getting this thing saved out and put up on the YouTubes and get the PSD loaded up on Gumroad for everybody. But hit me with some questions if you guys have anything. I know I kept you a half an hour over, but let me know if there's something I did or something you want to know that has nothing to do with what we're working on. Otherwise, I'm just going to make you sit here for 10 minutes and stare at me. My pleasure. I'm glad you guys stopped in. It's awesome. Will you do? Yeah, I'm doing one more stream tomorrow night. I'm doing. Let's see. Let me bring it up. I think I have it here. So if you go over to Gumroad and grab this guy. So this is tomorrow night's demo. This alien explorer guy. He's got this like astronaut suit. So this is up on Gumroad. You can go download it anytime you want. And we're gonna see if we can't put that together. So I did an organic character. I did a mech character. Tomorrow night I'm gonna do organic mech and a big piece of glass. And glass is like its own set of problems. So we'll take that on tomorrow night. Thank you guys. I really appreciate you guys coming over. The trick with painting over the lines was something I hella needed. Yeah, you know, that stuff goes back. The coloring, the stuff. There's a couple different ways to do that too. Let me just clarify. Like that is just one way to do it. Another way to do it is to use your line work and make a mask out of it. So the mask is technically your line work, and you fill it with black. You fill the layer with black, but you make the mask out of your line work. And then you can paint on the black of your actual layer, whatever color you want. That's one way to do it. You can lock the transparency of your actual line work and paint directly into it. And then the other one is what I just did, and I'm sure there's multiple techniques. I'm curious how you developed that initial sketch. I use that blockout brush, and I just start making silhouette shapes, and I just use, I just start playing with shapes and working out the silhouettes. It's definitely something on a longer stream we could we could get into, and we could do like a start to finish thing. But there's a couple of videos on my page, and actually I did a couple of demos for Autodesk. If you look up Autodesk Sketchbook Pro on their YouTube channel, I have a couple of start to finish pieces as well, and you can kind of see that entire process. Yeah, masks are black magic. Every time I try and explain them to someone who's never done a mask before, it's absolutely like the hardest thing I've ever had to explain. It's that and DPI. Those two things are like blow people's minds once they finally get their heads around it. How do you construct mechs? Do you just put parts together? No. I think personally the very first step to making a good mech is understanding human or whatever animal anatomy and the functionality, looking at the way actual things move together and actually need to function, so that you're actually making it look like those, the actual character can move. So when you start slapping things on just willy-nilly, it does look a little bit more like just like a like a big pile of junk. But when you start thinking of like ways to use like skeletal structure or like mechanical parts that have really accurate moving points, then it starts to feel believable. Let's see, where was I? Have you tried using different color ink lines? Yes, but I think if you were paying attention to my shortcoming throughout the demo, I like to do things in steps, and the coloring the line work is kind of the last stage, because I may not know what color the helmet's going to be ahead of time. So if I had made it a red line for the outline and then I made the helmet blue, it wasn't going to work out. So I always leave that step till the end. But if you know what you're going for at the very beginning, then you could definitely pull that off. Let's see. This is so inspiring. You would do more streams after. Yes, I am. Do you have any tips for designing mechs and armor? Yeah, I think I got into that a little bit. I'm not good at inking and smooth lines. Well, you know what? Get into Clip Studio, because it has these handy dandy. Well, inking definitely takes just practice. Like, there's no one picks up ink for the first time and just like, oh, I'm wicked good at this. But there's some stabilization settings in Clip, and I think Procreate has some as well, so that when you're making your marks, it will sort of like. And what's nice in Clip is there's a gradation of it, so you can go all the way to like very much. It really corrects your line to just a little bit, and so whatever you're comfortable with, you can definitely add that to your brushes and help you kind of clean up your lines. I want to know how to use masks, but I'm still at the point that I don't use digital more. I use digital more like traditional. That's awesome. Don't use it any other way than you aren't comfortable with, but I'll give you just like a quick, just so you know what you're talking about with masks. A mask gets paired with an actual layer, and here I'll throw it up on top here. Sorry for anybody who already knows how this works. I'm gonna put just white down. Okay, so if I make a blue square here, right? If I put a mask next to that, so the mask is basically what they're saying. It's tape. You're right now with it when it's white, everything on the layer, the blue square, is fully revealed. When you make it black, when you paint black in this paired file, and I'll just use a brush, and I make it black, it removes it, it hides it, right? It's not gone, it's being hidden. So and there's a lot of ways to use that. So if I were to turn off that mask, you'd see it. Now I'm disabling that mask, and I'm putting the mask back on. Disabling, putting it back on. And so it gives you a lot of flexibility to work non-destructively. So you can paint a lot of ways that normally, once you've painted, you've committed to, it locks you into what you did. And when you're working in these kinds of projects, you need to make sure that your work is editable and that you have a lot of the flexibility to make changes. So that's how masks generally work. I'm sure your creativity of Mech pieces is thanks to a huge visual library, right? I will actually say it's both having a good library, but also I get my hands dirty a lot. I actually build things and try things out and construct things, build things in Maya. Maya is great because you don't have to go to Lowe's to buy stuff. So but whatever you can do, like get into 3D, get into sculpting, play with clay, like mechs, you really need to understand how things work. So just falling in love with mechanisms and, clocks and cars and landing gear on fighter jets and things like that. So it's huge. Those stabilizers are sexy. Yeah, they are. AKA smoothing in Photoshop. Yeah. Jacinto, the G pen. Okay. Procreate lines. Yep. Procreate's awesome. Okay, so yes. Freelance is something you can do anywhere in the world. Yep. Taxes, never going to be good. I don't know if there needs to be some clause that artists don't get charged taxes. Some of your skulls you posted on Instagram seem to have a digital 3D-like filter. How do you do that? Oh, like the thickness of the stickers and stuff like that? Or the texture? Yeah, those are just Photoshop tricks. I can't get into that tonight. That's a whole other thing, but yeah. It's just trickery. But there's a lot of little layer tricks that you can do in Photoshop that are plug and play. Okay, Toonfisk, if you want to see just the sketching process and we'll just work through some silhouettes, I can do a video on that pretty soon. As soon as some of this stuff calms down, that'd be fun. Happy to help. Any tips on picking line weights? I sometimes have problems with lines being too thick or too fine if I have to change my print size. I just did a comic for the book that I have in my shop right now, and I was running into that like crazy, and I actually had to draw like a couple of heads in different sizes and print them out on an actual printer to see what was holding up. And then I went back and kind of like adjusted my brushes accordingly. I'm constantly adjusting my brushes to the project and to how I feel that day. And I think I was mentioning it earlier in the stream where some days I come in, I'm very heavy-handed, so I have to dial the brushes back. And some days I'm very light-handed, so I have to push the brushes forward. So I'm constantly adjusting my settings. So I think it's something where you have to, you really do have to match the line work to the final output. If you're just drawing for fun, who cares? If you know you're going to post it on Instagram, it's going to shrink. One thing that's been really huge, and I didn't realize how big a deal this was going to be, and it was somewhat of an accident because we were posting so much. Get your image on your phone, look at it, and it immediately falls apart where it's broken or where the piece sucks on your phone because you're looking at it at a different scale. So to get away from it, to have a different view of it, is a good tool. So just like even just taking a picture of it with your phone and then just looking at it and being like, oh, the eye's screwed up, like just looking at it from a different vantage point helps a lot. Could you do like a traditional drawing while streaming? Sure, I will absolutely do that. That's much more stressful because I can't make mistakes, but yeah, I think some of the old Inktober techniques I did where I do a lot of ink washes and things like that, I want to do some videos on, so just definitely keep an eye out for that. I'll bring some of that stuff in where I'm doing the markers and I'm doing the inks, and we'll go through all those processes. What about Blender? Is that right for artists? I don't know if you can do a blanket statement. Blender looks awesome. That wax pencil or whatever it is that they have, it looks incredible, and I love doing little animations and stuff like that, so I definitely want to get into it. Is it good for artists? Everybody's different. Maya works for me, ZBrush works for me. I want to learn Blender, I just haven't had the time. I want to learn everything, so I just want to know every piece of software because even like when I'm building a mech, I will go back and forth between Maya and ZBrush and Maya and ZBrush back and forth because they don't always do the same thing the way I want them to do it. So it's good to have the flexibility to go between different programs to utilize them for what they're really good at and not just be so hell-bent on staying in one program just because you're a fanboy of it. Blender is rad though. It's some of the stuff that they've done is incredible. Yeah, and it's free. Who knows if it'll be free forever to just get you guys all hooked. How do you stay creative? What inspires you? That is a very common question. What inspires me? Okay, so I did do a video on this for Autodesk, but I'll give you a little bit of a glimpse. But I would like to recommend you guys go to Autodesk Sketchbook Pro and watch the 2 videos that I did on that. They're kind of like a zombie and another robot head that I did, but they talk a little bit about that kind of inspiration stuff. But the simplest way I can put it is you feel like you're bored all the time in your own world, but the truth is nobody is seeing your world the way you see it. And so you may be bored with your work. You may not like the way that or the world that you live in, but if you can kind of embrace it and start feeding off of it and looking at the people around you and looking at the little examples of life around you, everyone else is going to get excited about that. And you may be the last person that gets excited about it, but you are bringing something to the table that these other people just do not have the opportunity to see, and they also have that opportunity to bring something to the table that you've never seen before. So it will always feel like other people are getting inspiration in places that you're not getting it because you're not them. And it's this very strange kind of mental game that you have to play where you have to realize like you may not ever really love your work, but you got to keep making it because it's helping other people get into worlds that they otherwise would not have had a chance to get into. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. I think I said it a little bit cleaner because I had some time to think my words through a little bit better, but definitely don't get yourself down about like being a little too bored with what's around you. What's around you isn't around anybody else, and that's really special. All right, that was that. Your Inktober's are next. Thank you very much. That's awesome. I love doing the Inktober's. It's a great exercise. It's really challenging. It's great to use Maya for make easy templates for environments, for doing concepts and final pieces. Absolutely. I am the biggest proponent of using every single tool you have at your disposal to get to the final piece. If anybody tells you you cheated or you took a way around it to get to the final piece, they're not looking at the right thing. I grew up in a wood shop. I grew up working with tools. Nobody in a wood shop or in a machine shop or fixing a car ever was like, you can't use Phillips head screwdrivers. You're not going to use the 1/2-inch wrench, are you? You got to get the job done. That's the end goal. You got to get to the end goal. So if you're using Maya, you're using photos, you're using, whatever it is, go for it. Because it's the final product that you have to get to. If people start getting on you that you're cheating, they're just caught up in a game. It's not worth it. So is that learning curve feels a bit steeper with Blender? They all have steep learning curves. You open up any new piece of software, and you immediately get that sinking feeling in your pit of your stomach where you're like, everyone else knows how to do something I don't know how to do. How am I ever going to catch up? You catch up by just getting into it, reading tutorials. This is the best time. You go on YouTube, you can learn any program. Like, it's awesome. Like, it feels ominous. Everyone is smart enough to do these programs. I promise you, these programs are not designed to be prohibitive. They are designed to be inclusive. They want everyone using them. So, yeah. What do you think about photo bashing and that kind of art techniques? Hey, if you're good at it, I love it. Photo bashing is like the people who are good at photo bashing, it's amazing. People who are bad at it, it's awful. Just like cartooning. People who are good at it, it's awesome. People who are bad at it, it's terrible. It doesn't matter what technique they're using. It's just, are you doing it well? Are you crafting it well? Are you telling the story that needs to be told? Or are you just, kind of cutting corners and trying to get to the end? I will never say I don't like a technique. Anytime I've ever thought like that, I've seen someone use a technique and just blow my mind. It really comes down to the end product. If anybody says you can't use any kind of technique because it doesn't suit something, I feel like that's a limitation. We're all trying to make art. We're all trying to communicate ideas, and you put limitations on that. That's like muffling, creative people. I don't believe in it. Yes, hand-built cars. It's a nice thing to think about, but it's impossible. A teacher once told me digital is cheating, so get over it. Yeah, whatever. Cheating is fine. Monkeys cheat. Wolves cheat. Who cares? It's natural. Cheat. Do it. Get. All we care about is that there are good images out in the world. That there is good art. That there are new ideas. And if you're still trying to figure out how to draw something and you can't get your good idea out there because of that, you're the world is missing out on your good idea. This challenge of learning to draw, that's my self-inflicted challenge. It's not something that everybody has to take up. Is your comic making friends? There is a really nice texture feel that seems like it's amplified the shadows. How did you do that? I think I have a little chew brush that had some scratches in it and stuff like that, and I just kind of stippled it into the paint. So what I was doing when I was chiseling on this guy's helmet and stuff like that with the brush, I had some stamps that were I think they were coming from scans of painted metal that had been scratched, and those were actually really nice chunky chips that had a really believable feel to it, and I really liked it. I like the combination of believable materials with stylized forms. That's kind of my bag. So, all right, we're at 1:48. Let's do 2 more minutes. Anybody else have any last questions, and then we can call it and meet up tomorrow night, and then we'll draw an alien. Oh, it's not 1:48 for most people. It's 1:48 for me. It's almost 2 o'clock in the morning for me. But don't worry about me. Any last questions? Okay. So, again, last thing I'll say is I'm gonna save this up. I'm gonna put this up on Gumroad so that you guys can download the PSD if you want it. I will save the video up. I don't know if I'll do that tonight or I'm gonna do that tomorrow. And then yeah, tomorrow we'll do the same thing. And if you guys have any questions, throw them in the comments, or just wait for tomorrow night and we'll get into them again. So yeah, did I apply for Lightbox? No, I know Bobby from years and years ago, going to CTN and different shows and things like that. So he and I had a conversation. So there was no application. I don't actually know what the application process is. 10:50. I wish it was 10:50. I could still have another cup of tea. Do you think about making a Patreon? Every time I think about it, I get really stressed out because then I have to produce work and guarantee everybody work, and I don't really know if I want to do that. Maybe someday, but right now I got other things in mind. Okay, thank you guys. Thank you very much for hanging out with me. This is I wish I could explain to you how nice it is to hang out with you guys. I wish we were all in the same room, but for us all being cooped up, this is the next best thing, and it's been awesome, even for me. I love it. So thank you very much, guys. Thank you all. Costa Rica? Oh, I love Costa Rica. You live in a beautiful place. Thanks, Jordan. Thanks, Magdalena. gonna make you guys watch me drink tea for one more minute. All right. See you guys tomorrow.